Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you to this evening's full moon celebration, celebrating the fullness of knowledge of how to create Ram Raj, how to create ideal utopian society. Now, tonight we're talking about, at least at the outset, a specific section of the Yoga Vasishtha where Vasishtha explains about yogic flying. He tells a story in order to explain to Prince Ram, who's his student, all about yogic flying. And we were drawn to this story from a quote from a tape that we heard one day in the tape library where we were digitizing some old conversations between former president of the university, Larry Domash, and Maharishi. And these were in the archives, and we got hold of them and were digitizing them. And there was this one talk where they were talking about the cities, and Maharishi said, there's a chapter on the cities in Yoga Vasishtha where they say the body became the body of Akasha. Very clearly, the body became the body of Akash, and went there, and went there, and went there, and went there. So this was very interesting. We hadn't actually found any text before like this. And when we opened the text of the Yoga Vasishtha, surprisingly, I think it took less than 5 minutes to find this passage, which is in the Nirvana Prakaranam, the sixth of the books that make up the Yoga Vasishtha. And there were 7 chapters. And the 7 chapters lay out very beautifully and systematically the entire knowledge of higher states of consciousness, the whole range of higher states of consciousness, and the knowledge of how to master total natural law, how to become the master of all the cities. So the chapters start out. Chapter 1 is the marriage of Shikhidwaja, which is basically a love story which gives the opportunity to meet the protagonists of the story. And the main protagonist is the lady, and that's why you've seen a picture of a lady on the cover of the book. This is intended to be Chudala, the queen of this ancient kingdom, and Shikhidwaja was the king. So they have a very happy life together, and in their advancing years, they realize that everything that they've been focusing on and enjoying is transitory. And they started to look for something that was lasting and permanent in the world. And so they started meditation. And the description of the meditation sounds very much like what we call transcendental meditation. And they got a very good start, and they had very good experiences at the outset. And then the way the story continues, Chudala was very regular in her meditation, and Shikhidwaja's meditation isn't mentioned after that, but they started together. Chudala was very focused on her meditation, and very soon she reached cosmic consciousness. And there's a whole chapter on cosmic consciousness, her reaching cosmic consciousness and what her experience of that was. And then she keeps going on her practice, and she reaches unity consciousness. And then, very interestingly, she is seen one day by her husband in the inner apartments of their palace. And he sees that she's just glowing with beauty. And she looks as beautiful and fresh and vital as the day he married her when she was a young girl. And he wonders, what did she do? What nectar of immortality has she been drinking or partaking? And she proceeds to give a testimonial of her experience of unity consciousness. And explaining unity consciousness is not such an easy thing. She does a beautiful job, and You'll definitely love the expressions of that. I think we mentioned some of them in a previous full moon celebration. But anyway, he doesn't understand it, and he rebuts or rebuffs all her descriptions and thinks she's just talking gibberish. And she says what to do. She can't really communicate to her beloved husband the depth and fullness of her experience of enlightenment. So sometime along she gets the idea, I should learn yogic flying, and then I can really demonstrate what enlightenment is. And so she starts the practice of yogic flying, and then Vasishtha spends 220 verses describing what this practice is and how it advances and what its purpose is. It's interesting that he does devote, after a chapter on the theory and practice of yogic flying, he does devote a chapter to the first stage of yogic flying. This is the longest chapter, key chapter, where he's talking about hopping, what we do, hopping on foam, just going up and coming back down very, very quickly. That's the first stage of yogic flying. And then the second stage of yogic flying, that's another chapter, he talks about what's needed in order to stay up in the air longer and longer, and finally float in the air. That's the second stage. And then the third stage of yogic flying, which our heroine, Chudala, masters, is the ability to go anywhere at will in the whole universe. The core of this whole section of chapters, the core teaching, comes out in this one question by Ram, Prince Ram. He asks, why is yogic flying taught? And there's two reasons why yogic flying is taught. We'll jump ahead to say that much. One reason is that the environment created by groups of yogic flyers is so pure and wonderful that you would want your child, you would want your loved one, you would want anyone dear to you to be able to be in that environment that is so completely free of negativity. That's one advantage of yogic flying. And then the second one is that as a byproduct of the practice of group yogic flying, the collective consciousness of society is raised, and the whole society can be raised to a level of utopia, ideal society, or what Maharishi's called heaven on earth. So here at the bottom of this verse, Ram asks, with what purpose was the knowledge of yogic flying brought forth in the world? Now, when we were translating this series of verses, and this is the main chapter on the theory and practice of yogic flying, we were surprised when, in the answer to this question, Vasishtha starts talking about what we know today as the Maharishi Effect. And he's talking about the effect of meditators, the 1% effect that was first measured in 1974 with how many, 6 cities in 4 or 6 cities in the US where there were 1% meditators versus control. So he's going into this, and he starts with a definition of what collective consciousness is. And the idea is that everyone contributes to the collective consciousness a measure according to their, it says, chin matra, according to the measure of their chit, their consciousness, their sun matra. Sun is the sat, the truth, according to the level of truth that they're living. And the shunya matram, shunya is the emptiness or the opposite of fullness. So whatever is that level of consciousness or truth or opposite of truth, that put together, everyone's value put together, that creates the collective consciousness. It's a very clear and perceptive vision of what we mean by collective consciousness. Everyone's consciousness put together, but everyone has some little different value, and all these sum together, and that makes the atmosphere that the whole people create around themselves the atmosphere, the collective consciousness. So then, having presented this idea, Vasishtha says that 5% of the population meditating can create an ideal society, because the influence of one person meditating influences 100 people, he says. One person transcending influences 100 people in his environment. So then 5% meditating can create an ideal society. 5% of the population practicing TM and transcending morning and evening with the same innocent resolve and intention are enough to establish the coherence of collective consciousness. And this is the way to create peace. In this way, the radiance of life-supporting influence of 5% of the whole world's population is enough to establish a utopian society for the whole world. Now, this is Vasishtha. In this case, when 5% of the world's population is meditating, there's coherence in the collective consciousness of the whole world. This is what he says to the delight of the house of Raghu, his name for Rama in that verse. And then he goes on to explain that it's a field effect of consciousness. It's not people talking to each other or doing something or interacting in any way. It's a physical effect on the body mediated directly by consciousness, by the field effect of consciousness. So there's no superficial mechanism that's connecting the people that creates this 5% effect. So it's a very perceptive understanding that he realizes that the mechanism of the Maharishi effect has to be explained. And he explains it by explaining there is a field of consciousness which underlies the whole society. Now this is all very interesting, but what does this have to do with yogic flying? And this is where the direction of this argument is very fascinating, because Vasishtha notes that there are challenges to the sustainability of a society living utopian life, ideal life, heavenly life on earth with 5% of the population meditating. And the challenges come that utopia, that ideal environment, comes from the individuals meditating. So they have to keep meditating. And any challenges that they face and they can't meditate today, or they have to cut their meditation short, or whatever, any challenges that they face, that influences the collective consciousness. And if there's a famine and everyone has to go out and plant their own crops and doesn't have time to meditate, then the whole collective consciousness, the whole power of that evolutionary impulse that's sustained by the 5%, it disappears when there aren't 5%. And of course, we all know this from the research, that when the cause of coherence disappears, then the coherence disappears. It's not a surprise, but it's a very important point. So then he says, regularity of practice is of utmost importance for the whole society. The positive effects can be reversed by failure to maintain regularity of practice. And so he says you have to have guidance and inspiration for the meditators. These are all the things you have to do, naturally, to keep people meditating. But you see there's this issue of a challenge. And now the way to deal with the challenge is this new technology of yogic flying in groups. So I don't know if you can imagine my joy in going through this verse by verse and seeing that finally he's bringing it back to yogic flying. And he hasn't forgotten the theme. So now he gives a description of the group practice. And he says that when they're all seated together on grass mats, all experiencing together in golden domes, they use the word meru here to describe that, built specially for the purpose. a small group of experts gathered in one place has the same influence as the 5% of the population meditating spread out over the whole country. And then he describes it, seated together with the purpose of investigating consciousness as a field of all possibilities, practicing the Siddhi Sutras, they can influence the whole world, remaining in one place. This is a definite expansion of the Maharishi Effect. So then he says, first, the members of the group experience deeper and deeper silence for a period of time, meditating and transcending according to their instruction, creating the foundation of stability and evenness that will support the dynamism to come. Then, for a while, the group experiences the dynamism within the silent self-referral consciousness, experiencing the various divine powers, the siddhis, in sequence according to their instruction. I think you know what comes next. Next, the members of the group play about with the impulses of the transcendental field to make the absolute functional, beginning to challenge gravity in order to take off from the ground. For some time, they experience being thrown into the air by the faint impulses of consciousness. Following these procedures, the individuals in the group move quickly towards enlightenment. So this seems very familiar. It's actually very exciting to hear that. And now he points to the time of liftoff. When the bodies lift off, the individual selves of the participants become merged into the abstract universal field of self-referral consciousness generated by the whole group. And the minds and hearts of everyone in the group are brought into attunement with that integrated field of pure consciousness. The hands and feet, the bodies, the minds, hearts, and innermost selves of everyone in the group being joined together at the moment of liftoff, there's a universal consciousness created, a field of pure not-knowingness that is generated there in the group. And by that means, the individuals coming together as a group create a powerful influence of coherence in the collective consciousness of the entire nation. So this is the power of the liftoff. And then he describes that it's the square of the number. This is how powerful it is. You get the influence of the square of the number. And the word there is anya, anya, the other in terms of the other. That's how it multiplies that way. So he says that by means of the foundation of transcendental silence created by the practice of meditation at the start, individuals also grow in unbounded awareness. But the influence of integration of consciousness by the group practice of yogic flying multiplies the growth and stabilization of unbounded awareness by the square of the number of people flying together. So the advantage of yogic flying, Vasishtha says, fulfilling the desire to fly through the air, the yogic flyers make the power of consciousness clearly evident. The siddhas practically and visibly demonstrate the superradiance effect by which a small handful of individuals in a group influence the evolutionary trends of the entire nation. This is one of the other aspects of what makes yogic flying more sustainable than having the meditators spread out through the whole population. And that's that you can keep track that they're doing it. When they do it, they lift off the ground, and you can see that. It's measurable. So it's a very powerful thing. When the meditators are at home, you don't know if they're meditating correctly. You don't know if they're falling asleep. You can't really tell. You can check them, but it's not as clear. When they lift off in the group, they lift off. You can see it. So then, the conclusion of this is that the flyers are the upholders of the integrity and invincibility of the nation. They bring about benefits of increased love, harmony, and coherence for the nation because through their group performance of yogic flying, they're engaged in raising the level of happiness, welfare, and success of the nation. So they bring balance, harmony, and coordination to the innumerable desires within the nation. So the idea is that this is a technique of governing the whole population. This is how Vasishtha sees it. This is a technique of, without really going in there with police and military to make people orderly or all the other things that you could imagine doing to get people to be orderly, you create that influence of coherence from one central place, and the whole society enjoys heavenly life. It just happens automatically through that field effect of consciousness. This is how Vasishtha sees the technology of yogic flying, why he considers it important, why it's useful, why he's teaching Ram, hoping Ram will pick up on this and create an ideal society. So this is the end of the first section of tonight's presentation. Now, Dimitrios Karasis, champion yogic flyer and past president of the Ultimate Flying Club, and a graduate student in Maharishi Vedic Science, and a hard worker in the global country of world peace, working on supporting flying all around the world in various groups. He's going to speak to us right now and explain how Ram used this knowledge. Now we know what Vasishtha taught him. What did he do with it? Let's see.
And then Peter's coming back, of course, you told them. So Peter's coming back after a few minutes for applications of this in the modern society. So before I start, I'd like to mention the obvious, that the only reason we can even talk about this is because of you, because you are applying this knowledge and you're making it possible for us to speak about it in a practical way, as a practical body of knowledge, just because you are keeping it lively in the world and applying it. And tomorrow, if we wanted, we could create this Ram Raj for the whole society everywhere, just tomorrow, if we wanted to create big enough group. So, because of people like you. So, if you look at the neighbor next to you, that's the reason why we can talk about this. So, we've seen that Ram was taught this technology of TMCT practice, getting to the field of transcendence, functioning from there, creating yogic flying, creating results of various sutras. Okay, but did he apply it? What did he do with this knowledge? And there's an interesting section in the Yoga Vasishtha where a great passionate aspirant for enlightenment, Bharadwaj, approaches Valmiki. Valmiki, of course, as the author of the Ramayana, is the expert in what Ram did to create Raamraj and how he utilized his knowledge of enlightenment. So here Bharadwaj approaches Valmiki and he says, give me a summary of what Ram learned, of how Ram applied this teaching to create an ideal society. So that's why this particular section that we will look at, these chapters that you see on the screen, the reason we'll look at these particular chapters is because Bharadwaj asks him, give me a summary. He says it explicitly. We'll see it in the some quotes that I'll show you, that he says it explicitly, give me a summary of what Ram did after he received this knowledge. So that's why these are particularly interesting. So Bharadwaj, aspirant for enlightenment, wants to be as great as Ram in his experience and his achievements in his own dharma, of course, what he is destined to do. So he approaches Valmiki for that, very impressed by the achievements of Ram. And he says to him, and I'll try to restrain my comments as much as possible and let the quotes speak for themselves. They are extremely powerful, so if I can contain myself, I won't comment too much. So it's quite obvious from the quotes. So Bharadwaja, the great aspirant for enlightenment, he asks Valmiki, tell me, sir, what did Ram do after hearing the lecture of the sage, Vasishtha? Whether he, with his enlightened understanding, put any other question, or remained in his ecstatic quietude with his full knowledge of yoga and the supreme soul. That's Purusha, or that's what the meaning of that supreme soul word is. This is, by the way, conventional translation, so this part is even clear from the conventional translation. So Valmiki says he felt the fading of the awareness of his body after hearing Vasishtha. Ram felt the fading of the awareness of his body and felt a flood of rapturous joy within himself. Reminds us of something. Felt the fading of thought, fading of the senses, fading of the awareness. In other cases, he says fading of the senses also, going beyond the senses. So he forgot the fashion of putting his questions. He forgot about questions and hearing their answers. His mind was full with the ambrosial draught of delight. So there was no fertility there for questions, even though this is the source of creativity, of course, but all questions in a way are answered in that state, complete contentment. So that's what Ram achieved. And in other cases, this is clearly stated, this is a Turiya state, the fourth state of consciousness. And in this way, he says, did Ram attain the supreme state of Shiva, in which he sat tranquil without uttering a word. Shiva, we know what it is, it's the fourth state. Everybody knows, Shivam, Shantam, Advaitam, Chaturtham. It's the fourth state, the peaceful and blissful state of unified transcendental consciousness, beyond the body, beyond the senses. And Valmiki is ready to continue. Tell him what he did in that silence, what exactly he did. But Bharadwaj, he doesn't want to wait. He stops him right there. He's a great aspirant for enlightenment. He says, this is great, but probably I can't do it. Maybe I'm not that great. He says, oh, how much I wonder at such a high dignity which Ram had attained, and how much I regret at the impossibility of its attainment by a dull and ignorant sinner as myself. Because Ram is great. Ram is Brahm, So how can I attain this? Maybe I can make some progress, but maybe I can't attain this full magnitude of Ram. Valmiki says, no, you can't. Just apply what Vasishtha teaches. It is by your perusal, your review of the history of Ram, from its first to last, and by following the dictates of Vasishtha as given in these lectures. And we heard what the practical teaching of Vasishtha was. As also by your consideration of their true sense and purport in your understanding, that you may be able to attain the state that you desire. So no, you can attain this, just follow the same teaching. Systematically, you'll grow in embodying that totality. Okay, and now he tells him, okay, please give me a summary then of what Vasishtha taught him. What was the teaching of yoga? And they keep calling this teaching a teaching of yoga, a teaching of practice in this section. So, practical teaching. I want to learn at present the substance of all the knowledge which was imparted by the sage Vasishtha in many works of great verbosity. So very long, Yoga Vasishtha, 1,400 pages, something like that. So tell me in brief, and this is just a few verses of what he told him. Hear now, Bharadwaja, of the highest knowledge, I had to underline this, I just can't, of the highest knowledge which is taught by that sage, Vasishtha, for the salvation of mankind. So this is not just knowledge for individual enlightenment, it is the highest knowledge for the salvation, the permanent happiness of the whole human race. And the hearing of which will save you from your drowning in the iniquities of the world, in the sorrows of the world. So, the highest, and Maharishi Maharishi explains that when a person experiences the total Veda, experiences totality, they see also what the technology is in it. They see it inherent in the Veda, in the Vedic literature. So Maharishi says, from that level of experience, he says, speaking about the TMCD program and flying, he says, there does not exist, nor will there ever be, a more powerful or proven technology to change the trends of time in society. So according to Maharishi, who has that level of experience, there does not exist, nor will there ever be a highest knowledge. So here Valmiki claims, and Vasishtha claim to also have the highest knowledge. Well, now we have to see. They both claim the same knowledge, claim they have the same highest knowledge. If they describe what this knowledge for the salvation of mankind is, will it be the same? So let's see. I think we can make a good case. We can get as close as we can to showing that it's very likely the same. I will tell you in short, and upon the authority of the Shruti, again, this authority of the Veda, if you can experience the Veda fully, then you also experience what the technology is. How you may come to the knowledge of the first principle, that transcendent, and the manner in which it exhibits itself in the acts of creation, preservation, and destruction of the universe. Now, these experiences of how the transcendent creates, preserves, and dissolves the universe, not so foreign to the Invincible America Assembly, especially those who take part in the full program. When we create the sutra, create the result of the sutra, depending, of course, on the clarity of experience, on the day, on the level of stress, we can experience more and more and more, as we purify our nervous system, those mechanics through which something is created from the transcendent. Those mechanics of creating from the transcendence and dissolving the outcome. And next sutra. Creating something, dissolving it. Next sutra. So this is key here, and he goes into more detail in this. He says later that this is the practice. You get to the transcendence, you create, you dissolve, you create again. So he gives us a hint here, but he goes into more detail. Just what Maharishi has told us. Did I click next? Yes. So Valmiki, the following, form the world. This is the Prakriti that forms the world divided and undivided. We know divided Prakriti, eightfold, undivided Prakriti, the unmanifest dynamism of consciousness. So these, he says, you are experiencing when you are creating from the transcendent increasingly. This culturing the experience of those is this practice. He says these form the world, whether they're divided or undivided, from their succeeding and surrounding ones. The earth, and then subtler, the sea, and fire, earth, water, fire, and then the yogi experiences a contraction in the process of transcendence of the more solid quality of consciousness, earth, more fluid quality, more and more abstract levels, fire. These grow with experience, and there have been people in the Invincible America Assembly, of course, who have reported experiences on that level, experiencing those fine levels of creation as we transcend. By contracting his thought of the former one under the latter, his experience of the former one under the latter, it's a conventional translation, so you understand. So the experience from one under the latter will engross his experience of heat under that of air, and this again under his experience of space, akasha, our favorite, which last is swallowed up by his thought of the great cause, the great source of all this. And here he makes it really clear. Follow this again. I have selected key verses from that section, but he makes it clear this is the practice of yoga, of Vasishtha. This is the practice of yoga, highest practice to save mankind. Follow creation in the direct method and its destruction in the reverse order. and then betake yourself back to the fourth state of Turiya. So that's what we know in our city practice. We won't go into detail, but we know we do our creative process, create a result, create our lifting, and then we come back into the body. Dissolve that impulse, create it again, dissolve the impulse, sutra after sutra, like this. So this is the practice. Follow the process of creation from the transcendence. Dissolve it back as a practice, systematically. So Maharishi, of course, in his latest unified field charts for every educational institution in the world, for every subject, he displays those exact levels. Solid, physical, earth-like quality of consciousness. Solid, tables, things, very solid. Then more faint thought, like flowing quality of consciousness, watery, and then fiery, even more subtle, changing quality of consciousness, and then airy, and space, our favorite, and then also he does mention, Valmiki also mentions, intellect and memory like that, like in this chart. I just had to select some key verses so that Peter can continue with Cambodia afterwards. So, I have thus related to you, and this is what he describes as a practical practice. He says beyond that, yes, you have to have good diet, you have to be in the company of those growing in enlightenment, like that. But this is the practice that he describes as a summary of the Yoga Vasishtha in that section. The summary of what Ram practiced and what he implemented. So, I have thus related to you, my son, all the doctrines of Vasishtha as the best means. So as if it wasn't enough to tell us before that this is the highest knowledge for the permanent happiness of the whole mankind, he repeats it here again. The best means to the way of your knowledge and practice of yoga meditation. And Ram actually practiced this, and there are references to this in the Yoga Vasishtha. For example, when Vasishtha urges him to start taking action to change the destiny of the world and create Ram Raj, he has to urge him strongly to come out of his practice, to come out of his city practice. He's so absorbed in it, doesn't want to come out at first, Ram. He's very deep. So he says, "Oh great armed Ram," says Vasishtha, "it is not the time for you to thus slumber," or we would say in a translation, that's more conscious-based, we would say to thus experience yoga. "Rise and rejoice the hearts of your people." Don't be, beyond activity in that state. Just rise and create that state in the whole world. And then Ram confirms in the next verse that yes, this is how I attained my greatness, because of what Vasishtha taught me, the practical teaching of yoga of Vasishtha. After he comes out of his meditation, Vasishtha convinces him to come out. He says, yes, of course, he says at first, because I will do anything you tell me. I always do everything you tell me. So another clear indication that he applied the thing. He says, the knowledge, he says, I always do everything you tell me. Vasishtha. So I'll come out now. If you tell me to come out, I'll come out. So he says to the assembly there, "May ye all prosper and know the most certain truth to which I have arrived, that there is nothing better than the knowledge, the experience of the self, and none superior to the preceptor, the teacher, from whom it is derived." So he applied this, gained this experience according to the teaching of Vasishtha, and because he always does what Vasishtha tells him, he must have used it to create the same state of enlightenment in his whole society. "Thus I have related to you the whole narrative of Ram." He tells him also what Ram achieved on the basis of this, so he tells he saved Sita, he applied this knowledge on a societal scale to produce the desired effect in society so that everybody is happy and so on. So after this summary of how Ram applied this knowledge, Valmiki says, thus I have related to you the whole narrative of Ram. So this is the whole essence of how Ram achieved this, according to Valmiki. Do you now, O Bharadwaja, follow the same course of yoga and be happy forever, like Ram did. So this is applicable by everyone, increasingly, of course, now with the stress of collective consciousness, might be a little slower than it was for Ram and the people of his age, but we can create the same speed of evolution with larger and larger groups. So just a quote, finishing with this quote about Ram Raj, what was the result of Ram's application of this in society, and then a quote from Maharishi on how we're applying this today. During the reign of Ram, as a result of this application of Vasishtha's knowledge of yoga, the people were exceedingly happy, content, fulfilled, and easily lived in accord with natural law. They were free of sickness, free from disease, and devoid of famine and fear. So all good to everyone. And today we have the modern Ram Raj. We have a representative of this intelligence of Ram in our time, which can create groups. And the result will be, Maharishi says, that people will be practicing Vasishtha's technology, yogic flying together underlined, yogic flying practice together, and the result will be an atmosphere of positivity, all positivity, no negativity, no conflicts, no confusions, not so much of sickness, no failures of intentions, no failures of efforts. No, he says no again, very clear. Everywhere there will be positivity, peace, bliss continuum on the level of integrated national consciousness, which is the level of invincibility. Our clarion call is invincibility for every nation and permanent world peace based on the integrated national consciousness of every nation. And then very strong at the end, it's unimaginable what a fortune the world is going to witness from this week, from next week, from these days, from the next days. Just instead of flying at home, they have to find a common place to fly together. So just what Vasishtha wanted. So this is what has always been the teaching from the very beginning. It seems this is quite conclusive evidence, because Ram clearly says, yes, I always apply what you tell me. So I think I've stayed within the time frame, Peter. And so it has always, Maharishi always says, I did not invent anything. This is what the wise have always been saying. And now we see more and more evidence of that through this research, especially the research of Dr. Peter Freund in an entire book of how Vasishtha taught the same technique of TMCD practice and yogic flying that we are practicing. So tomorrow, if we want, next week, and next month we can create this. So thank you very much. It's all because of you that we can discuss this. And please, Dr. Freund will now give us the practical application of this one small of the many, but still extremely significant. That shows the power of what can be done with this. So, thank you.
So now, this is one of the most amazing stories I've ever found out about. I don't think it's very commonly known, but there's been an application of Maharishi's technologies of creating Ram Raj in Cambodia. And at the start of this, Cambodia was the poorest country in the world. And that is not an exaggeration, because poor Cambodia was in the sites of the bombers from the Vietnamese War, and Cambodia's infrastructure was completely destroyed, and all the roads were bombed. It was not a happy situation. Regardless of what had been the state in that country before, after that, they were definitely in dire straits of poverty and misery, and it was the poorest country in the world. So let's talk about this intervention. What can we do about it? So there were some steps that were taken, and these were taken in 1991, 92 is when it started. First step, get support from the government for the establishment of a university. Maharishi Vedic University in Cambodia. And Prince Sihanouk was all for it. He was completely behind it. He thought this was a great thing for his people. So he supported them. And the next step, acquire land. So they got, I think, was it 80 hectares, some number of hectares, and then they had some additional hectares for agricultural purposes. So then, next step, build facilities, classrooms, dormitories, homes for the faculty to live in. And then gather faculty to teach, and then advertise classes for potential students in the whole region. So they did that advertising after they had done all these steps. Let's have a look at the library that they built. This is the library at Maharishi Vedic University. So 5,000 students applied to the university. They had only planned for a smaller university, so 500 students were accepted. And then the students arrive, and they teach the students TM. And after some time, the students have some experience with TM, and then they teach Yogic Flying. And then they make Yogic Flying part of the curriculum. And now we have an army. We have our change makers ready to transform Cambodia. It's ready. And this was very simple. And this is just one small area bringing some funds together and building a university and getting some students. And then here they are, the most powerful force for peace and prosperity in Cambodia. Now in Cambodia, the superradiance number is said to have been about 243. And so there was a long period of time when they had just about that, or a little bit more, right in that area. There was about 15 years from 1993 to 2008 when they had some little ups and downs, but basically right at the superradiance number. And the scientific research says that they were really doing it. So these students in this flying hall, and this is the whole story. It's a very simple technology, and you don't have to buy guns and tanks, and you don't have to train police. Just take a little bit of time out of the routine of students who are going to class anyway, and let's see what happens. In the intervention in Cambodia, the first step is put an end to civil war. Now, there was some research done by Hatchard and Kavanaugh, and during the 1990s, from 1990 to 1998, there were 71 nations that wanted to change their political system to democracy. And this is kind of a surprising thing. We think, oh, democracy is a much better form of government. That must have meant heavenly life was in store for all those countries that chose that. Before the elections in these 71 countries, there were 59 countries at peace, but 12 countries had civil wars that were ongoing. After the elections, there were only 36 countries at peace, and 35 countries had bloody civil wars that followed their elections. So this is kind of a dire strait of what happened in the world. But in that picture of those 71 countries, there were 3 countries that had civil war at the start, before the elections, and they had peace afterwards. And what's very interesting, in all 3 of these war-torn countries who enjoyed peace after democratic elections, there were groups of Yogic Flyers, and that included Cambodia. The other is Mozambique, which you all know, And Namibia is very poorly known because the research about that has not been published. But those are the three countries that went against the direction of that was experienced by the other countries who were implementing democracy. So let's go on. Second step, create a healthy, thriving economy. So the numbers on the left-hand chart are showing the growth rate in per capita GDP. So the growth rate was trending from 2% up to 12% for eight or 10 years, and then there was a time when things went down a little bit and the growth rate wasn't so high, and then it started trending up again. So from 1996 to 2007, there's a trend line, and then from 2008 to 2012, there's another trend line. So dramatic increases in the per capita GDP, gross domestic product growth rate, really dramatic. Any developing country would like to see numbers like that. And then on the right-hand chart, Cambodia's annual percentage change in consumer price index between 1990 and 2001. And you see those big high lines on the left? Those indicate that there was a lot of inflation. Inflation is really a hard thing to deal with. It doesn't create a thriving economy. It makes people's money worthless, so they can't invest, they can't do things. That quickly came to an end, and they enjoyed very healthy economy thereafter. Next step, participate in the global economy. On the left chart, you see starting from zero, essentially, Cambodia's annual apparel manufacturing revenue in billions of dollars. So they started from nowhere. They had nothing. And they went up to 2.5 billion in a number of years. Dramatic change in exports. Exports are so important for the health of the economy. And what's also important is if you have a beautiful country, and Cambodia is very beautiful, and if you have peace, you can have foreign tourists come, and they bring money and they improve the economy. So they had this dramatic increase in foreign visitors due to their increased peace in the country and the growing prosperity, and foreign visitors flocked there, and they enjoy it to this day. And then a very important point when you want to make the poorest country wealthier is that you have to spread the wealth. You have to get everyone in the country. You can't just have the top people getting wealthier and everyone else lives in poverty. And this is what happened in Cambodia. The percentage of undernourished people fell. The percentage of the population living in poverty fell dramatically. There was a United Nations representative who was looking at the statistics. He said, "Where did the poor people go?" So there was a percentage of the population with access to proper sanitation increasing from 3% to 30%. The percentage of the population with access to clean water increasing, food poverty declining, infant mortality declining, decrease in young child mortality, decrease in maternal mortality, saving 70,000 mothers' lives, and then increases in education, education spreading more and more, so that the enrollment in the primary grades doubled, more than doubled in secondary school, and the amount of money that the government budget, percentage of the budget allocated to education doubled. So the poorest country in 1990 became the 63rd out of 152 in 2010. So let's remind ourselves, who did this? Students can change the world. Maharishi calls it invincibility through student age. So we're going to see a tape now. It'll take me a minute or so to go up there and start it up. But there's a part towards the end where Maharishi summarizes everything we've been talking about tonight. He says, so there's nothing new, same thing. But now we have the evidence that if this is organized in groups of people, then the radiance of harmony and peace and uniformity, that will be much larger in its intensity throughout the world. Knowing this from the Vedic literature and experiencing this in our society here and there, including Cambodia, in small scales, we take courage to just wipe off all the inadequacies of living in our world everywhere. So let's see what Maharishi has to say.
The Transcendental Meditation Program Advanced Lecture Collection, A Vision of Possibilities. Unfolding the Fullness of Atma in Human Life. December 24th, 2004, Lodrop, Holland.
Jai Gurudev, thank you, Your Excellency Dr. Hegelin, for your beautiful words. In Maharishi's opening remarks today, he said that the goal of this training is to administer society anywhere. And then later Maharishi mentioned the point that what is going to be achieved by this training is the experience of the junction point in the state of samadhi, the state of perfect balance of awareness between silence and dynamism, so that one can use all the laws of dynamism and silence, and this will be perfection of life of those who are administering society as the Rajas. And there is a question from the press that actually relates to just this point. Maharishi has said in a number of press conferences that transcendental consciousness is the level of silence, and that level of silence, by continued practice, can also be put to action. So the question from the press is, how can silence be put to action, since silence and action seem to be contradictory values in life?
I congratulate you for such a question. This quality of unmanifest, there are two values, unmanifest and manifest. Unmanifest value and manifest value. It is in the unmanifest state that all the manifest qualities are latent, in the same way as everything of the tree is latent in the hollowness of the banyan seed. The hollowness within the seed, that is unmanifest structure of this tree. So unmanifest, it is unmanifest tree. But what it has memory of the whole tree. This memory, knowledge of total memory, is the knowledge of Atma. There is a secret. What one gets is the knowledge. In the field of consciousness, the entire physical universe is present. In the unmanifest field, transcendental field, Transcendental field is the unmanifest value of the universe. And what is the unmanifest value? We call it constitution of the universe. In any constitution, all the activities of the nation are inherent. Constitution is the unmanifest value of all the manifest structure of a nation. Nation is concretely available. One sees, one hears, one touches, one this, all dynamism, all activity. But all this is present in the unmanifest field within the self, and that is called Atma. When we look into the definition of Atma or the self, then it is that which is infinite, and infinite in every way. And infinite in every way means infinite silence and infinite dynamism. So infinity in every way is Atma. So the unfoldment of Atma in human awareness takes the human awareness to be the custodian of all knowledge and all organizing power of knowledge. That is why throughout the ages, importance of Atma realization, importance of self-realization has been sung throughout the ages. Know thyself, know thyself, I am the universe, Aham Brahmasmi. All these beautifully meaningful exhortations about the nature of total natural law in one's own self-awareness. This being the situation, there is no reason for anyone to be in any way depressed or tired or negative or anything. Everyone has to be a wave of bliss for himself and for all others. And that will be what we have been saying, heaven on earth. Every wave, a wave of bliss. Every wave, a wave of bliss. This training will be on the basis of the actuality of total knowledge and its practical application in our hands. And we have tried it out on individuals here, there, everywhere during the past 40, 50 years. So there is nothing new, same thing, but now we have the evidence that if this is organized in groups of people, then the radiance of harmony and peace and uniformity, that will be much larger in its intensity throughout the world. Knowing this from the Vedic literature and experiencing this in our society here and there in small scales, we take courage to just wipe off all the inadequacies of living in our world everywhere. We have the ideal of family life in the world family. The world is my family. Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah. Everyone to be happy. And Ram Raj, in the reign of Ram, suffering belonged to no one. Ram Raj, Dukh Kaho Na Vyapa. These are the exhortations in simple words for all times, for everyone, for every society in our world. So we are promoting this, and it's natural. It's natural. There is nothing much in our offer except naturalness of life, which is total bliss, naturalness of life. Whatever the reality of darkness, we don't deny. So many misfortunes belong to the field of darkness, but we are emphasizing the lack of darkness, a state full of life. That is what we are. We don't say darkness doesn't exist. No, that will not be very, very practical, because everyone is suffering these days and all that. But to take that suffering is inevitable, that is lack of understanding about life. Whether it comes from scientific level, or it comes from the religious level, or it comes from the faith or non-faith level, it's wrong and waste of life. We promote naturalness of life, simple. Our Vedic education, Vedic health care, all these very beautiful and glorious ways of reality of life. And now the world will have it, because every aspect of this theory of perfection in life has been tried out and has been understood, has been seen from above, seen from left and right and behind, every. So we are very easy and comfortable about taking this step of talking about the whole reality, experience about the whole thing, and establishing the working order of the institution which will sustain knowledge in the field of action. Total knowledge in the field of total action. We invite the people, and we'll continue to have increasing waves of success for ourselves personally, and for all our family, world family. So it's very good, it's very good.